So what we're going to talk about in this session is a new project that's available in PowerBuilder called the .NET DataStore. And we're spending the majority of the time talking about that. We're also going to touch just briefly on some changes to PowerClient. So first, there is a legal disclaimer. And then the agenda, like I said, we're going to be talking a lot about the .NET DataStore project, the new one. And then we're going to touch briefly, the one change to PowerClient is the change to the PowerClient project painter. And we'll just go over that briefly. So a bit about me. I've been using PowerBuilder since about version 1.0b, so I've been around a while. In addition to PowerBuilder, my skills are Oracle PL/SQL, Java, C#, and C++. A little bit about the company I work for. Okay, so like I said, this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time. We're going to talk about this new project. So you go into your File New, Projects tab, and you've got the Application Wizard and the application for your standard client-server stuff. You've got PowerClient, Power Server, and now you've got this new .NET DataStore. You click on that, it takes you to this dialog. The one thing I've noticed is you've got an existing solution. It tends to put your new project into that same solution. That's not exactly a pattern I'm really fond of. What I'd recommend is just making sure that if you want to keep your projects in separate solutions, you make sure that you go in here and update the solution section as well to point to the new solution you want. Anyway, moving on. So the next thing you're going to get is Converter tab. So it's going to take whatever PowerBuilder application you've already got in the workspace or in the solution with the new solution format we have now, and it's going to list all the data windows that are available in the application. And by default, it selects them all. What you're going to need to do, although the PowerBuilder IDE did have a database profile in it, several probably, you're going to have to create one for the .NET DataStore. So that's what, let me zoom in here a little bit. Notice the database profile option there. Make sure you go in and create that. Create your database profile, or you're not going to get too far. But anyway, what you can do here is you can change the name of the model class it's generated. You can adjust the column mappings. You can adjust whether or not it's previewed, or you can just accept all the defaults. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing all the data windows, but anyway. In the sample, I'm going to do like 2 when we get into the demo. This will take you into the scaffolding tab, and once again, you're going to want to focus here on the template, and I'm going to cover the different options. But as I say, the once again, we're just referring to, notice here how you can change the target and the service and the controllers. You can accept the defaults or you can rename them. So, and there's your models as well. So if you don't want like the D underscore, because it's based off the name of the data window, and if you don't want the D underscore in front of all your services and controllers, you can go in and change that. But the really important thing here is which template you're going to use. So, well, we'll get to that in a minute. The next tab is the security tab, and that would indicate whether or not you're going to use any authentication. When I do the demo, I'm not going to use any authentication, but you've got some options here. Now, this has changed a lot. This, or a version of this was available in an earlier version of PowerBuilder, and what you used then was Identity Server. Identity Server basically went commercial and abandoned their open source project. So that's no longer available. So what we have now are a JDBT server, AWS Cognos, Microsoft Entra ID, or some other. Those 3 are built in. So for them, it's built in, I should say. Or some other auth service that you're going to have to pretty much code manually. So here's the options. I'm stepping back now to the template options. So there's 3. Non-PB client. That's if you're going to be writing services that are going to be used by some REST client other than PowerBuilder, where it expects to get just plain JSON and that it will submit plain JSON. So it will create 5 methods, basically the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Except for read, it generates 2, one that retrieves a list and one that retrieves a single record. The PB-Client template is if you're going to be writing these web services for a PowerBuilder client to call. The great thing about the data window, what was revolutionary about it when it came out, was the fact that it maintained state information inside of it. And so it remembers the original version of columns and their updated values, and it maintains flags indicating the update, whether or not columns have been updated, whether or not rows have been updated. Really kind of revolutionized how CRUD operations were done. So if you're going to be talking to a PB client, you can pass that state information back and forth. Now you do it using a rather non-standard JSON format so that it's only PowerBuilder that understands it. But if you do that, it allows you to still continue to take advantage of the power of the data window. So the 3 methods that you'll get rather than the full 5, because for your update operations, you can just pass back the entire set of data with all the state flag information, and the data window can take it from there. And then any client, what that does is basically generates both sets of methods. So you get 8 methods, and now you can have PowerBuilder clients calling your web services and non-PowerBuilder clients calling your web services. Now I mentioned that the 5 methods that it creates, and apparently I lied. Here is I did an any. And so what happened here is these are the 5 it created for the non-PowerBuilder client. Create, retrieve 1, retrieve the list. Those are the true retrieve methods. Update and delete. And this is actually a PowerBuilder method. These, all of them except for the delete method, the create takes JSON in as a post body. A retrieve, is just, the get methods are just a URL, and they return JSON. The update takes JSON as a post body as well. And then the delete does not take JSON. It's also a standard URL, which just passes the ID and doesn't return anything other than a status method, status code, I should say. These are basically the 3 methods that are generated when you do a PowerBuilder client. So there's that update with model that we saw earlier, but it wasn't really any client REST method. Then we have retrieve with model and retrieve or update with model. We're going to get into it here in a little bit. I was talking about some of the advantages you have using the PowerBuilder methods. There's a big one coming up here, and that's why there's this 3rd method. So, like with the REST methods, normally those REST methods, you're going to be working with one data window. And even with the first 2 of these PowerBuilder client API methods, you're working with one data window. So if you've got 3 data windows on your window and you're updating all of them, you're going to make 3 calls for the update at least. And you'll be making 3 calls for the retrieve. There is a new object that's been added, and we'll get into that in a minute, but that's actually mentioned right there, batch data objects. What that allows you to do is make 1 call. And so if you've got 3 data windows on your window, you can retrieve all 3 data windows with that single call. And you can update all 3 data windows with that single call. And it's any number of data windows or data stores. So this is an example of using the retriever to retrieve 1 with that just returns plain JSON. That's the non-PB client, but I'm actually calling for PowerBuilder. This is the retrieve with model. This is how you retrieve a single data window. And so now I've got 2 calls because I'm retrieving 2 data windows. How you retrieve multiple data windows, but now we're using the PowerBuilder specific method for doing the retrieve. And then this is the batch data objects. So what I'm going to do now is I've created a batch data object. I've registered the first data window with it. I've registered the second data window with it and actually passed in any arguments I want to use for the retrieve. And now I make 1 single call to the PowerBuilder specific method, and I get back the data for both data windows. So let's go ahead and let's look at a demo of using the new .NET DataStore project. So let's go ahead and look at the .NET DataStore. So we're going to go to the new dialog, and this is the project option tab. See there, and .NET DataStore is there, and it works on whatever the current project is or target, depending on whether you're in your workspace or solution format. We're in workspace format, that's the target it's going to work on. These are a couple of data windows I copied over from the PFC demo app that Pete, just because I didn't want to deal with all the data windows were in that project. And I'm just going to put this, I'm going to create a new folder for this, just to make sure I don't overwrite some of my existing work. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Converter tab, and as I mentioned, even though I do have database profiles here, and I've actually got other .NET DataStore projects over here, this new project doesn't know anything about database profiles. It's tied to the project. See, nothing in the drop down. So I'll go ahead and say new. I'll call this thing. I use SQL Server, and okay, I'm going to connect to the Pete database. I'm going to accept the license terms, test connection, make sure that works. That looks good. Okay. Go to the scaffolding tab. This is where I said you need to look at the template you're going to be using. And so whether you're going to support a PowerBuilder client, non-PowerBuilder client, or both. I'm going to use the Any client, which supports both. I'm leaving everything else to the default. I'm not changing anything else, and I'm not going to be using security. So we're going to go ahead and generate that. And this will take a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and run that. Now, what this does is it creates a SnapDevelop project and then runs SnapDevelop. What you're going to need to do to get SnapDevelop, it doesn't come with PowerBuilder anymore. You have to go to the Dev Magic website, and you can download it for free from there. Let's go ahead and go back to my sample code. So, and I showed some of this stuff in the slides. And I've got a window here. There we go. I've got two data windows. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the non-PowerBuilder client retrieve methods. That retrieves straight JSON. And I'm going to retrieve that using retrieve and retrieve one methods directly into the data windows. Okay. The second, this is a project list. This is a project. So I've got an argument on there saying I want the first project in that first one. That's let me show you the retrieve one, and I got the one behind it, which means just retrieve that project. This is retrieve with model. Now this is the PowerBuilder specific way of doing it. The code doesn't look particularly different, except down here. I'm just calling retrieve with model and passing an argument. There isn't a separate method that has the argument as part of the URL. It's actually an argument you pass to the URL. So that doesn't look terribly different. What the difference it makes, though, is like on an update, when you do the update with model, you're just going to make one call. You know, if you had inserts, updates, and deletes, and you were using the REST methods, you'd have to call insert methods, delete methods, and update methods. And with the PowerBuilder specific one, you can just call an update with model, and the service itself takes care of figuring out what it needs to update and what it needs to delete. And then the third option I was showing you in the slides is this is with the PowerBuilder specific methods. There is a retrieve or update with models. So I create this batch object, and then I add the objects I want to retrieve, data window 1, data window 2, and in the case of one that has arguments, you pass in the arguments when you do the add retrieval object, and then you make one call, and that one service then returns both data windows. Same thing for the update. If, for instance, I had two data windows and I had updates to both, I could batch them up, make this one call, and then the service would then figure out which data windows it needs to update, which kinds of updates it needs to do. So really reduces the number of calls you have to make, even with, so you don't have to do them for the specific CRUD operations. You also don't have to do them for individual data windows. You can batch all that up. So let's go ahead and just run this and see what we get. So we're going to talk about in this session is a new project that's available in, wants me to save this. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. And do retrieve. So that's using both methods. So it used the retrieve here to get the list, retrieve one to get this particular data window that just shows one project down here. And so it made two calls. And this is using the non-PowerBuilder version. This is retrieve with model. And so that made the same, it made two calls, but it returned data window specific JSON. That doesn't matter so much on the retrieve. It's on the updates where that becomes a lot more important. And then this is the batch. So that made one call to the service and retrieved both data windows. And like I said, where it becomes more of a benefit is when you do the updates, and you can send in multiple data windows. They can have all different kinds of updates in them, inserts, deletes, updates, and the service takes care of all that. So you just make the one call. So that's pretty much it, the .NET DataStore project. All right, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so that was the new .NET DataStore project. The last thing we're going to talk about here is the redesign of the PowerBuilder, PowerClient, I should say, project painter. So this is the way it looked in PowerBuilder 2022. And this is the way it looks in 2025. So you notice the tabs here are down to the left, where previously there were a lot more of them and they went across the top. What's going on, you'll see this in a minute, is you notice how, like in general, we've got all these options. What they've done with in the redesign is they've simplified. Notice there's a basic and advanced tabs. So they take the options that you're most likely going to change, and they've put them on the basic tab. And then the stuff that you're most likely not going to ever change is going to be on the advanced tab. And that's going to be the same for security and build and deploy. Now, one thing we'll mention here, FTP deployment is no longer an option. If you want to do FTP deployment, you're going to need to use a third-party tool to do that. And there's plenty of free FTP tools available. CyberDuck, something like that. FileZilla. Okay, so I was always told when we're teaching, you should tell people what you're going to tell them. That's why you do the session agenda. You should tell it to them, and then you should recap. And so we're going to recap. What we've talked about today is the new DataStore project, and we talked about the changes to the PowerClient project painter. All right. Before we go, here's some ways you can stay in touch with Appian. The one I'd really recommend is the community.appian.com. That has discussion forums. There's tech articles. There's blogs. What I don't see mentioned here is there's an area where people upload code samples that other people can download and play with and use in their own applications. I think it's pretty cool. So I would really recommend going there if you're not already familiar with it. The other things are that Appian has a Facebook site, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter accounts as well. So you can follow them there. But this one in particular is a place, if you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. So with that, thank you, and it's time for questions and answers. you.